And welcome to another show of Don't Get This Twisted. I am Rob, along with my co-host, as always, Tina. How you doing, Tina?
I'm good today, Rob. How you doing?
Hot.
Yeah, no kidding.
It is warm.
Yeah.
And it's going to get nothing but worse.
Well, it's about time we get in the pool.
Yeah, because I know by the weekend it's supposed to be 100 where I am. So probably the same where you're at, I'm assuming.
I'll be in Vegas this weekend, so it'll be even hotter.
Oh, well, I'll tell you because I have that. I have that on my app from when I lived there. Let's see. Saturday. Are you going to go Friday or Saturday?
I'm leaving Thursday night. I have a wedding Friday and a wedding Saturday.
Okay, so Friday it's going to be 112.
Holy crap.
And Saturday it's going to be 115.
Oh.
And Sunday it's going to be 116.
Oh, good Lord.
So those are indoor weddings, I'm hoping.
I don't know. I think so.
Yeah.
But if they're not, we're not going to be dressed in very much. So
no, you're going to melt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank goodness you're not. Are you going to be there Monday or are you leaving Monday?
I'm leaving early Sunday morning. I'm just going in Thursday night, wedding Friday, wedding Saturday, and then I'm out.
Well, that's good because Monday it's going to be 117.
Oh, balls.
Yeah.
It's going to be not cool.
Whoa. Hey, there's something that we don't have on this show very often. A phone call in the background.
What the hell? I'm so sorry.
We're generally really good about doing that.
And I let everybody know that would call me, and it's spam risk. I am so sorry for that.
That's funny. It's all right. I can't even tell you the last time that's happened. Like early shows.
Yeah. Well, I took a nap before this, so I don't think I'm quite there yet. So
right.
My apologies.
But I mean, you do have to say that, like, I think it was like probably within the first 10 shows. And then after that, we got really good about turning everything off right before we went on. So, what do you know? A year and a half later, we have one. It's okay. It's all right. Again, like, that's why I like not editing this show, like everything out of it, because that just seems it's for good realism.
Right.
Oh, is that your watch this time?
Fuck. Yeah. Okay, everything is off now. Now watch. If somebody comes into the door, I give up. There's not much I can say after that.
I almost got you to say fuck. That would have been perfect.
It didn't come out. I thought it came out. Not the whole word.
It was like fuck.
I'm trying. Right. I'm really trying to not cuss. We'll see how it goes.
So check out our socials, all those cool things, and go to Spotify or Apple and Amazon. Check us out.
Follow, and subscribe.
That's right. It's free. And then share it with all your friends and send it all over the planet. So this week we went and had lunch at our spot in the valley, Chi-Chi's Pizza. And we were talking about some things about what we wanted to talk about. And you came up with one. And I was like, oh, all right, let's go further, expand on that. Because we did one way earlier, risk versus reward. Mm-hmm. And obviously risk and reward walk hand in hand. If you're risking a lot, I'm hoping that the reward is big. Because if it's not, oh, man, I think you're kind of going down the wrong path. I think most of us don't risk enough times. Mm-hmm. We sit on our hands a lot and just kind of go, well, all right, we'll see what happens, instead of like jumping to the forefront. So you kind of have something to say where you're like, what about risks and the times they failed?
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, think about that. And then let's do it, but just kind of throw what you were thinking out there, and then we'll get on top of that with I'm sure things that we've risked before and they've totally failed.
Right.
What were you thinking?
There's a lot of times where you risk and things don't go according to plan, like getting married or falling in love. It's a risk because you don't know how long it's going to last, if the person's going to love you back, if you're going to stay in love, how long will it last? Like, do you sign the prenup? Do you not? Like, there's all those type of things. But also, like, I remember a time in my life where I was not married and was barely dating. And then my daughter came into my life. Now, again, she's adopted. She's not my biological daughter, but the risk of changing my whole life to accommodate a child and being a mom, because it wasn't just accommodating a child, it was raising a child as your own and adopting her and going down that pathway. And we don't speak anymore. So I was talking to a friend and they're like, well, was that a risk worth it? Or was it a risk that wasn't worth it? And I had to think about it. Unfortunately, because we don't speak anymore, that was a huge risk that didn't work out for like the long-term plan. But the risks for the short-term plan, I believe it did, because I was not able to have a child. I did not learn that until well after I adopted. And I got to know what it was like to be a mom, have a child, raise that child, defend them relentlessly, and be the mom that I would have been had I had her. But having gone through that and things not working out, it's like, well, was that a good one or was that a bad one? I don't know. It took myself and my ex down a path that we went down apprehensively, but we did it. And now we're not together. So it was funny how we were just talking about, was it a good risk? Was it a bad risk? What do you think now? How did it work now? Or, you take a path with a job and the job doesn't work out. You could have had a different one, but you took this one for whatever reasons and it doesn't work out. So it was funny because when we were talking, I was thinking about all these times where you risk and fail. You could take a wrong turn down a street and end up in a car accident. That's a risk you have to take when you're driving, especially here in LA. But do you not take them or do you take them? And as much as I'm glutton for punishment, sometimes I wonder, but I still say mostly I would take them. I take a lot of risks that when, if you ask my dad, he'd be like, that was a dumb thing to do. He said that to me several times over my life. So I don't know. It just got me thinking, like, how do you take the risk? Why do you take the risks? Like, how do you, what goes on during it and how it ends up? So that's always like, that's a huge, all those questions I just asked are like huge topics that we could have gone through.
I think I see where you're coming from though, because I think a lot of people like to say that they've taken these risks and they've paid off. And not many people will admit to failing. I think the job one is probably a bigger one because a lot of times you're leaving a job to start a new one with, maybe the job you're at is good or even great, but money is always a factor, right? So you take this job, because I did it. I took a job as an alarm tech, and I ended up traveling 3 hours before I ever picked up a tool many times a week from Camarillo to Paso Robles. And for people who are out of state, it's a drive, 3 hours and with no traffic.
Yeah. And so California, there's always traffic. So,
I left my house at 5 a.m. and I got to my first job at 8 o'clock.
Okay.
So, and the middle of California, it's a lot of
farm country
where it's just empty lanes and you're driving. So, short term, it was great because I was making more money. But then it did things to me physically. Like when you're sitting in a van and for 3 hours both ways and I didn't have cruise control in it, so I couldn't take my foot off. So like there was things that I felt like physically were happening to me. Like my legs were always sore and I didn't want bad things to happen to me.
Right.
But I took the risk because on the front end, I was like, cool, I'm going to make more money. But I think it was a fail long run because it just didn't end up working for me. It was harder on my life than I thought it was going to be. So I ended up going back to the job that I had before that. Thankfully, I was lucky enough to go back making the same amount of money. So
nice.
It sort of paid off, but from the risk of going to a new place, it really didn't. I mean, I ended up going back to where I was working, thankfully made the same amount of money, but there was a little humble pie that I had to eat.
Mm-hmm.
So, I can see where people don't want to say these failures, or like, I think moving to Vegas, as much as it was a risk, it definitely didn't pay off. I ended up not in where I wanted to be. And then it was 2009. So, the housing market took a shit.
Yeah.
Everyone took a shit. I ended up losing my job. I ended up thankfully making it back to California because most people, if you leave this state, it's so hard to come back. I ended up making it back here in a decent position. Finally got work, blah, blah, blah. But I would say that as a risk, me moving to Vegas it was a failure, complete failure.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean,
I think I've always taken risks. I would say that I made my parents both very uncomfortable with some of the things that I chose to do. And I was bold about it. I would just say, well, I'm doing this. And that's the way it goes. And, but I also at 19, I got into doing hair. I went to school for it and I made it a living, and everybody's like, oh, she'll only do this for a couple of years. She won't stay with it. Well, 31 years later, now I'm looking at teaching. So I've come a long way in my business in that respect, and it paid off. But on the other hand, like I've done some really stupid things that didn't pay off.
Right. And I think that it's good that we can stand up and say that. Because like I said, a lot of people I know will probably not call things failures. They'll just breeze over that part of their life and go, oh, it was just, I ended up doing this. Well, they'll end up looking at the risk that was the reward. Mm-hmm. And it's like, what about somewhere in between there? Or like relationships are the easy thing, I think, for most people. Some are big risks and some are obviously not as big a risk. I ended up buying a house with somebody and got sued over it. Bad risk and a total failure.
Right.
So, and I know lots of people that have been or are in relationships that are a failure, but they won't say it is because they don't want to be judged for it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's sad. You should kind of wear some of these failures as a, badge of honor. Like if you've gotten out of something, the long run of it is, yes, it failed, but it should be a badge of honor to wear and say, look, I got out of it. Things are still shitty.
Yeah.
And I failed, but it's okay because I took a risk that maybe I shouldn't have, and it got me here. Now it's the next risk, right? We should continue to take these risks.
Absolutely.
Like you said, you want to teach. In my employment right now, my manager just quit, gave his notice, and everyone was like, oh, are you going to apply? Well, yeah. I mean, whether I get it or not is irrelevant. The risk has an upside. Mm-hmm. If I do get it, Obviously I'll, hopefully make more money, blah, blah, blah. Now, the risk is big though, because there's generally not going backwards to your position.
Right, right.
When you make it to a manager, your next way out is gone.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you do?
There's a risk there.
There's a risk. But it's one of those ones where you should be willing to fail.
I agree. I've failed so many times in my life, or what I would consider a failure. But, in those times where I had to pull it together because life wasn't easy and it wasn't neatly put together, I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about what I wanted, what I didn't want, what I could handle, what I could go through. It's like I've learned how to pick myself up and be like, well, that wasn't the smartest thing I've ever done, but let's try this and we'll go a different direction. And I do challenge myself often to doing things that I've never done before. But yeah, there's been some times where, you're just like, God, that was the stupidest thing I could have done. And yet I did it. And I've bungee jumped 3 times, big risk. It was fun as heck, but like I think about it now and I'm like, why would I be so stupid? I did one of those jumps where you jump and your head goes into the ocean, like it hits the water and then bounces back out. Really, why? Why would you take that kind of risk? It was fun, but looking back at it, there was no reason to do it. I've never been an adrenaline junkie. I just did it because I thought I could, or thought I should, or just plain wasn't thinking. I mean, it was fun, but would I do it again? No, not now that I'm older. I wouldn't take that risk. When I was in my 20s, heck yeah, I would have taken it 100 times.
Why do you think people are afraid to talk about their failures?
Because people want to put their best side out, and I think that we're judged so intensely at times for failing that people like don't want anybody to know about it. I'm fortunately the person that everybody calls when things do go bad or when they do go good. I've heard I've been a really good cheerleader, but I've also been like, hey, you did it. Everything's cool. You made it work and it is what it is. So I fortunately get to hear a lot, but people, when they say they shouldn't have done it or they made a mistake by doing it, I always think, what did you learn? Because apparently you were put in that situation for a reason. You had to have learned something, whether it came out good or bad. Like it was happening for a reason in your life, and there was lessons that you were to be taught. So do you look at those as a failure, or do you look at those as it was a good thing? It just depends on how you look at it and where you're at in your life too. Because like I said, I know now that I wouldn't take in kids and do that again. I've learned what I needed to learn. I got the lessons I needed to get, and I'm good to not make those same choices again. And I do kind of look at it as a failure because we are not close and I don't have that bond or that family that I once had. So when I look at it long term, I see that I kind of feel like a failure. I do. But then if I look at it like, okay, nobody else stood up for that kid. Nobody else was there. You were there. You did all these things. You learned some hard lessons. You always learn hard lessons being a parent. Doesn't matter if the kid comes out of you or not. But I think about it and I'm like, damn, did I need to know how hard it was going to be? Did I really have to learn all that? And, I guess it's all just part of growing up and getting by. But I think of all the risks I could have taken had I not chose to do what I was doing. So there's also that too.
There could have been other things that you would have, different paths you might have went down.
Absolutely.
Taking risks is what takes you to the next risk. Mm-hmm. You have to continue in life to take risks.
Yes.
Failure or not. Failures are part of of everything. It's not to make life seem like a game, but a good sports analogy is always that, right? You have to be willing to lose to win.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't do it enough. There's too many of us who sit on their hands forever and are okay with just being blah or just being content. And that was me for many years.
Yeah.
Many years. Like too many, 15 actually. There were times where I was just like, no, like I didn't want to move. And my ex-wife hated that. Like I was like, nope, why? We got a place. Let's do this. I don't want to leave. And then of course I get divorced. First thing I do is leave the state. So there's things to be said with that. It's kind of like moving where I move now. It was a risk, but on a lot of levels. My kid, had been living in the same place for a long time. It was the same company, but it was new people. So I had to do that. But it was a risk worth taking. I got to be on my own again. And, I've talked about my old roommate a bunch of times. She was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
She was super great. And I would never, ever shit on her. She was a great, great, great girl. It was just time for me to grow up. And I had a chance to take a risk to come, a far away. I really only have one friend down the street who's like close that I'm close to. So again, I was going back to being in a place where I didn't know a lot of people, but the risk I thought was big, it was worth taking. I was jumping up in pay quite a bit. And now I have another chance that, so maybe this risk will pay off or maybe it won't. And, 2 years from now, I'll be off to somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but I was willing to fail. And that I think is the biggest thing. You can't worry about the people around you and how they're going to take your risk because it's not theirs.
Exactly.
It's yours. And if the friends in your life aren't willing to pat you on the back a little bit, they should be hesitant. I think any good friend or any good family member should look at you and kind of go, hey, look, there's an upside, but there's a fucking downside. And the downside is really, really, really bad. But if you get over the hump of the risk, the risk could be a really good payoff for you. So I just think people are too afraid. And again, I'm not trying to point fingers at anyone who listens to the show, but we all know that person that, again, it was me. I for many, many years, I was content. Why mess with anything? And then you meet certain people or you get certain job or you get this or you get that. It's like, look at my tattoos. I got most of my tattoos in my late 40s.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody does that. When I tell people, because people will look at me now and they go, man, your tattoos look really good. I was like, yeah, because they're not very old.
Yeah.
And they're like, really? And then, I explained to them. And then first of all, most of them don't think I'm as old as I am, which is even funnier. I was talking to somebody at my work and they're like, you're 52? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, oh, I thought you were like in your early 40s. I was like, well, cool. Like, it's good to hear.
Forget I said that.
Yeah. But they couldn't believe that, they're like, you got all these tattoos in your late 40s. And I was like, yeah, because sometimes the risk is worth the reward. Maybe it was just something I had to do for myself. And we all have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what I'm trying to tell my kid. It's like, look, you have to live for reality,
right?
But you have to take risks because risks are part of that reality. Like, be safe and be good and don't do this kind of thing and look at your future, realistically. Once you hit 21, 22, life should start kicking you in the face a little bit, but you have to take a risk sometimes. And it's like me. Well, at one point in my life, I'll either meet someone here in California, fall in love, and I'll stay here. Or I'm going to pack up all my shit and pick a state somewhere else and pick up my life again and go somewhere else. because it'll be time to take a risk again. I just don't know yet. But I think everyone should do that. Failure is important. You need to lose every blue moon to make you climb that, ladder a little bit higher to take the risk.
Mm-hmm.
Because when things are good, and I mean just good, not great, not horrible, just good, you get stagnant and you end up thinking everything's okay. And maybe it's not. And you're not willing to see that it's not. That's my divorce thing. I thought everything was good. No, everything wasn't good.
Yeah.
So,
it's funny because I don't know if I brought this up before, but in my life, women tell me all about their husbands and I always hear them complaining. And when they're complaining, I'm like, wow, my ex never did that. He never did this. He never did that. Like there's a list now going because I'm hearing this so often. I'm like, so what made it stop? Like, why did we leave? Why did we? Because if you look at us now, we're really freaking good friends. Like we get along very well. We just didn't want to be married anymore. It got to the point where like, yeah, we're tapping. But then I hear other people and the stuff they put up with was way worse than I ever even could have imagined me putting up with. And yet I left and they didn't. And I wonder, was it a good move? Was it not a good move? And I do believe it was a good move. I think we needed to do that to be friends again because we were just not getting along. But at the same time, I was like, what was I bitching about? Because it seems like the majority of women put up with way more bullshit than I ever did. I really didn't have all that. But again, it's like, what is going to make you truly happy for yourself? That's where you have to go with things. And I've always been the daredevil, the one that'll try new things, except for moving. Now, moving for me is not something I want to do because I take care of everybody in my family. I'm the matriarch at this point. And the thought of moving kind of scares the bejeebus out of me. But I want to do it. But that's the risk that I'm not taking yet.
You're just not willing to do it yet.
Not yet. But will I? I don't know. It depends.
And I get that. Moving will pucker your asshole up. It really will. When I moved here, look, I lived my life knowing what I was going to make here I could get by.
Right.
Actually, I could do more than get by. I would be okay, or I wouldn't have moved here. But that being said, there's always I remember the first night here, I sat on my couch in my underwear when my kid was in his room, hooking up his video games or some shit. And I remember just sitting here for a second and going, oh shit, I live alone again. Like I have to
it's all on
really
me.
Make sure that I'm doing everything correctly. And
yeah,
it's hard.
I get you. I remember when I was 5, my parents moved to my home that they lived in. Oh, my dad still lives here. And I do too now. But I remember when we got here, Mom put us both to bed in our rooms, my brother and I. And then I heard her crying. And Dad was like, don't worry, we'll make this work. We could do this. It's going to be hard, but we could do it. Now, I remember her, gosh, at the time she was 24, 25. She was so afraid of living here and doing things. And I get why. My grandmother lived right down the street, and my grandmother, her kids were all at times a mess, and that did drip over into our world. But at the same time, my mom was close to her mom and needed to be there, and we wanted to be close to our family as well. So it was like, it was a risk. Most of the family moved away from everybody else because the family was dysfunctional, but we stayed. And I look back on it now, like my cousins are like, why did this happen? And I'm like, oh, don't you remember so-and-so did this and that? And that's what happened. And nobody knows because nobody was around. Here I am right down the street. We were on the same block as my grandmother, just opposite sides of the street. And man, I know so much about the family that I never thought was even a secret until I talked to my other cousins, and they're like, I didn't know that. I didn't know that makes sense. Like, but I remember my mom, that risk of living here and going through that. I remember she cried that night. My dad was like, hey, we bought a house. It's okay. Like, everything's going to be cool. But at the time they lived, before this house, we lived in a house in Northridge, which was at the time very upscale. And we had a huge yard, and the houses now are going through I think it's 1.7 million. And so, I mean, it was a huge house and a big house in the LA area. And they downgraded to this house because they couldn't afford property taxes, and they had to buy it with my uncle. My uncle stayed in the back house. And so when they finally could move, the house was much smaller than the last one. And they risked it. They left knowing that they had a smaller home and a small family, and they weren't in the same neighborhood, and they weren't going to have me go to the same schools. And lo and behold, all these years later, this is like the hub for all of our family on both sides. Not only that, but friends still now that, because they know I'm back here, they still go in the gate and knock on my window, and I open the window. I'm like, what the hell are you doing here? And they'll just show up. So it's like, I look at that risk that mom and dad took back then, and I'm glad they did, because we really do have a good community here of family and friends and lifelong people, not just, people from the last 5 years. We got a huge group of people that we've been friends with 20, 30, 40 years. So, I was looking at that. I'm like, okay, so that risk paid off. But if I would have asked my mom, would she have said yes, that it did pay off? I don't know. Perception is a bitch sometimes, but I've been looking at these things because I'm at a crossroads with everything in my life. And I'm like, here I go again. I'm not afraid to take risks. I'm pretty good at it, and I'm intelligent enough to handle myself. But it's also scary because now, at our age, there's not a lot of time to fix real big fuck ups.
Well, that's the thing. Is it worth it?
Yeah.
As you get older, I can see why people stay stagnant, because it's safer, because people like to live in a safety net. And look, I get that part. I really do.
Yeah.
Being in a safe place is easier, but are you living? I think those are the bigger things as well. Like the risk to live. Like sometimes you have to go on the leap of faith, right? You have to look at the river, and are you going to jump across it? Or are you going to stay on the one side and go, well, I don't like this side. This side's okay, and I'm getting by, but there might be something on that other side that's worth going. I always love the is the grass greener? Right. And everyone will tell you the grass isn't always greener. And this is what I say. Sometimes you have to hop the wall to see what the grass looks like. If you're not willing to hop over the fence to look at the grass, you can't bitch about your yard.
Well, I was also told that the grass is greenest where you water it, where you put your time in, where you put your effort in, where you put your love into. That's where it's going to be greener. So it really doesn't matter one way or another. It's where you're going to make the effort and take the care.
But if the grass is already turning brown, right? You know that the grass isn't green on your side. You're just hoping that the shade on the other side is better.
Yep.
But unless you take the risk, you'll never know what that shade of green is, or shade of brown for that matter. You might hop the fence and it's dead. You know what I mean? And that's our life. And I think the risks are 99% of the time worth taking, because the failures are going to come, and they're going to come in every single thing you do.
Mm-hmm.
It could be as easy as backing out of your driveway and smacking a car across the street. That's a fucking fail. But, what do you do? Shit, go. The next day, you got to still back out. You got to continue to back out for the rest of your life. So unless you're willing to take the risk, and some risks people aren't ready for. I'm not ready to jump out of an airplane yet. Before I die, I'll probably jump out of an airplane.
Do it sooner than later, because it gets harder to do as you get older.
And I'm not a thrill junkie. I watched my ex-wife do it, and she did it. My boy was born already. He was probably 3. So she was like in her late 30s. She loved it. The funny thing is that she loved the free fall, hated when the parachute opened. So it was boring. Now here's the flip side. I would probably be the polar opposite. Yeah, because I think she liked the thrill of the fall. I'm the photographer in me wants to see the beauty of the world as you're coming down, because we're not supposed to fly. We don't have wings.
Right.
So, and I think I would probably enjoy the free fall a little bit, but I think, and again, I think when the parachute opens, it is the part where you're like, whew, the risk paid off. I'm going to make it to the bottom. Thank God that
opened.
But I think the other thing is the beauty, right? So I think there's beauty in risks. You just have to see them. And your risk isn't going to make everyone happy. Mm-hmm. And it's not supposed to. It's supposed to make you happy. And sometimes there's repercussions to that risk. Family will be mad at you. Friends will be mad at you. You know how many people I've heard that have gotten relationships that have ruined friendships? I can't believe that you're going with him. I can't believe you're going with her. And, friends who've been friends for 25 years end up not talking with each other anymore. Mm-hmm. So, and then maybe you take a risk in a relationship where you're trying to be with somebody and it doesn't work out and you never talk ever again. I mean, that to me, that's a fail, but it's part of taking the risk. Sometimes it happens and it's sad. Some risks.
I don't know. I think failing is staying in the relationship when it's not working for either of you, and you stay in it and you're unhappy, but you live that life because you signed up for it. That's where I think the fail comes in. I don't think the fail is a big deal if you're trying to just live your best life and do whatever you got to do to make yourself happy or to make yourself better or to learn more, try more, just have a more enriched life. Like if you don't take the risks, you're not going to have anything different. You're going to go through your life dealing with the same thing at the same time and learning the same lessons and not ever like freeing your soul. Because I think that's part of it. For me, it's like, let's just see if I could do this. It may totally blow up. And it has. I mean, it has. Big situations in my life have blown up righteously. But I've always learned something. And the biggest thing that I've learned is that I could still freaking manage. Like I could still put myself in this situation. I could still be going, oh my God, how am I going to do this? But at the end of it all, I have learned that I am capable more than I've ever given myself credit. So I do take a lot more risks than I would say most people, just because I know I'll figure out a way to get out of it or figure out a way to make it work or, do whatever I got to do.
You'll get to the other side.
Somehow, some way.
Right. And I think that's the big thing about like being okay with failure, that you understand that failure can come, but it's not the end game. Mm-hmm.
And I don't go into anything thinking I'm going to fail either. I go in like, I'm going to do this. Like, sure. I got this. I can handle it. I don't always handle it. Like, be honest, shit happens.
Look, we all don't handle it. I mean, let's be honest. And again, I'm okay with that. I think no, what people should get from this is that it's okay to fail when taking a risk.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay.
It's necessary.
That's probably the best thing we've said today.
Mm-hmm.
It sometimes is a necessary evil to fail, to get on to whatever the thing is that's going to enhance your life and be the positive part.
Let's think of all the things. Silly putty wasn't supposed to be silly putty. It was a failure, and it turned into a big children's toy that everybody's played with. Or like
penicillin.
There you go.
Penicillin was just something left in a fucking refrigerator that became mold that now saves the planet.
Yeah. So you think about all the things that even Post-it notes came from an adhesive that they were using for the space shuttle, if I'm not mistaken, and it didn't work. But here, everybody used Post-it notes now. So
and it was just some guy who decided to do it.
Yeah, it's just somebody trying to take a risk.
Well, I mean, for modern times, it's Google, Amazon, Facebook. These are all risks that paid off. But, the failure rate of most of those is probably quite large. But people are still willing to do it. And I think that's big. It's like doing this, that there's the right now, the payout's not the greatest, but the risk of doing it was fun. Mm-hmm. There was risk in the only risk in doing our podcast was, are we going to make it past 10?
Well, no, I think for me, the risk was being vulnerable and telling everybody the stupid shit that I was doing. Well, that for me was the risk.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've had to answer for some of the things I've said on this program to people in my life. And yeah, that wasn't my happiest moment. But you know what? It ended up being okay. Again, the risk was okay.
Yeah, for me as well. I mean, I think that most of the people who know me that listen or already knew that I was going to say crazy shit because that's just who I am. But the few people who are new listeners, like people that that I've talked to, like your friend in Tennessee, it's interesting to see how other people take it. And, it's a small risk for me, but still a risk nonetheless. But people who I talk about on this show who do listen, it's still a risk, but I nothing's malicious. I don't think I ever, I do my best not to bury people or say bad things. Mm-hmm. I'm just being open, and thankfully the few people who know that it's about them, really are good and have no problem saying like, hey, this or that. And it's, it's been multiple people who have said things like, oh, is this me? Or, oh, you were talking about this guy. It's like, yeah, I was talking about him. And it's good. And I think that people should look at risks with not a grain of salt, but with something of a smile at the end. Whether it takes you 2 months, 2 years, 6 months, or 6 years, the payoff is still the payoff. Mm-hmm. You may have to be in a lot of mud and a lot of shit for a little while, but hopefully at the very end, you realize like, hey, it took a lot of turns to get there, but it was worth the risk.
Yeah. Even like you said, the podcast, we've been doing this for over a year. We hit 102, I think, episodes, 103, something like that.
Almost 2 years, I think.
Almost 2 years. Okay.
I think.
And I was worried about, what my dad would say. He's never listened. My ex would say he listened to one episode that was like the easiest one to listen to.
Right.
Most of the people that I've even mentioned, my brother doesn't listen. My cousins don't listen. It's funny because they all know they all are very aware that I do it, and yet nobody listens. And I think
we got to get them to listen.
Why do they not want to listen? Like, what do they think I'm going to say? Or what do they think I've even said? You know, so I've taken this risk knowing that I wasn't going to get any support. You know,
Right.
I just did it and said, I'm going to do it with Rob, and that's that. And that's what I've been doing. So it's I don't know. I think it's always a good thing for you to take a risk. Just know that when you're taking it, it may not be a popular opinion. You know, you may not get people happy with you for doing what you're doing, but the end result should be you should still do what calls you.
Yeah, you have to be true to yourself.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
And I think that's what taking risks and willing to fail are. And just so you know, we started in September of 2021.
We're almost 2 years into this.
Almost
Holy crap.
2 years now. So, but any last words here on our program?
Even if it's uncomfortable, still do it. Make a mistake, live your life, enjoy what you're doing, but do take risks. Do give yourself something to wake up for, because I think that's so important. Waking up for work every day isn't what should drive your desires. You know what I mean? Like, you should find more, you should try more, you should do more. You should definitely screw things up sometimes. God only knows I've done it a few hundred, but that's neither here nor there. But, you know, I really, because of what I've gone through and because of what I've experienced, I believe that when people talk to me, they feel okay to say anything because they know that I'm not judging them because they weren't perfect, because I wasn't perfect. They just know that I'm going to listen to them. And I'll even tell them, let me pop some popcorn. I want to hear the whole story. You know, let me learn from you, or let me hear what you went through. Let me see you fail, because it's still going to be okay. You're still going to get through it. And let's start talking about not being so perfect and not having to have all the answers, because I still don't have the answers and I still don't know what I'm doing. And I'm at a crossroads in my life, which is this is the scary point. I'm like, everything I do is a risk right now. So I'm like, what happens if I screw these up? That's what initially started this whole conversation was, what am I going to mess up next?
Well,
we'll see.
Yeah. Whatever you mess up is going to springboard you to something else.
Yeah, that's true.
So my only thing is, look, failure is an option, and sometimes it leads you to the better things in life.
And for me, I believe failure is not taking the risks.
Yeah, that's the best way of putting it.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll go with that. And check out our socials. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Make sure to check us out on all those social media, on all the podcasting formats. The better ones would be probably Apple and Spotify, because it's easier to track. And leave a rating. Say something about us on there. If you're going on Apple or if you're going on Spotify, leave a message behind. Give us a star rating. It helps us get the word out. And it's an opinion show, so don't get it twisted. Keep coming back every Wednesday, and we'll have more fun stuff to talk about. Tina, it's been a pleasure as always, and we will talk to you next week.
Have a good one, Rob.
You too. Bye.
See ya.
Don't be this